At my husband's family barbecue, his sister made a joke. If you disappeared tomorrow, no one would even notice. I accepted the challenge and vanished. It was last summer, one of those sweltering August afternoons that just screamed for a backyard barbecue, and Gregory's family, in all their boisterous glory, had gathered for their annual ritual of charred meats and questionable life choices. I was in the middle of recounting some particularly frustrating saga from my job, probably something about a client who thought urgent meant whenever I feel like it, but you better jump, when Amanda, Gregory's older sister, and a woman who possessed the comedic timing of a well-aimed pie to the face, cut me off mid-sentence. Her eyes, usually sparkling with a mischievous glint, narrowed into slits of pure, unadulterated sass as she quipped, "If you disappeared tomorrow, no one would even notice." The words hung in the air for a beat, a collective breath held, and then the dam broke. Laughter erupted, a cacophony of guffaws, snorts, and slaps on knees. It wasn't just a polite chuckle, it was the kind of hearty, unrestrained mirth that makes your stomach ache. And then I saw him, Gregory, my Gregory, doubled over, his shoulders shaking with silent, mirthful spasms. He was laughing too. My own boyfriend, the one who was supposed to be my unwavering ally, my rock in this sea of familial chaos, found the idea of my non-existence utterly hilarious. The world, for a split second, tilted on its axis, and the smell of burning charcoal suddenly felt less like summer joy and more like an impending disaster. It wasn't the joke itself that stung. I'd heard worse, dished out worse. It was the collective affirmation, the shared amusement at the thought of my utter insignificance, and the fact that Gregory, of all people, was right there, basking in the glow of my comedic demise. The sun, which had moments before felt like a warm embrace, now seemed to beat down with an oppressive heat, highlighting every bead of sweat on my forehead, every flicker of uncertainty in my eyes. I felt a weird mix of humiliation and a strange, detached curiosity, as if I were observing the scene from above, a silent, invisible spectator at my own vanishing act. The conversation, of course, moved on. The laughter subsided, and the clinking of glasses and the sizzle of burgers on the grill resumed their rhythmic soundtrack. But something had shifted, a subtle, almost imperceptible crack in the foundation of what I thought was an unshakable bond. The taste of the potato salad, usually a highlight, turned to ash in my mouth. I tried to feign a smile, to nod along with the conversation, to pretend that the casual cruelty hadn't lodged itself deep in my chest like a shard of ice. But the truth was, it had. And for the rest of the barbecue, amidst the forced cheer and the lingering scent of barbecue sauce, I couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that Amanda's joke, delivered with such careless ease, might just hold a kernel of uncomfortable truth. The silence that followed, after the laughter died down, was heavier than usual, almost suffocating, as if the air itself was pregnant with unacknowledged implications. It wasn't a malicious silence, not outwardly, but it was there, a subtle hum beneath the surface noise of the party, a faint echo of Amanda's words reverberating in my ears. I found myself scrutinizing Gregory, trying to decipher the nuances of his expression, searching for some hint of remorse or a fleeting apology in his eyes. But all I saw was the lingering afterglow of amusement, a contented sigh as he reached for another burger. It was a mundane scene, utterly normal, yet in that moment, it felt like a spotlight was shining solely on me, exposing a vulnerability I hadn't known existed. The casual disregard, the ease with which my perceived absence was laughed off, left a bitter taste. It wasn't a grand betrayal, not in the dramatic sense of a movie plot, but a quiet, almost insidious erosion of trust, a tiny chip in the armor I wore, revealing a raw, sensitive spot. The rest of the evening blurred into a series of forced smiles and stilted conversations, each word feeling like an effort, each laugh a performance. I wanted to disappear, not in the way Amanda had joked, but in the sense of becoming truly invisible, to melt into the background and escape the uncomfortable weight of being seen, yet simultaneously feeling unseen. The air grew cooler as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, a beautiful backdrop to my internal turmoil. The fairy lights strung across the patio began to glow, casting a soft, deceptive warmth over everything, making the lingering chill in my heart feel even more pronounced. I kept replaying the scene in my head, dissecting every word, every laugh, searching for a different interpretation, a way to spin it into something less hurtful. But the more I replayed it, the more the simple, unvarnished truth emerged. They had laughed. They had all laughed, including Gregory. And in that moment, under the fading light of a summer evening, I felt a profound sense of loneliness, an acute awareness of my own distinct presence within a group that had, for a fleeting moment, imagined me gone without a ripple. The sting of their laughter, a collective wave of amusement at my expense, had settled deep within me, a cold, hard knot in the pit of my stomach. And as I sat there, the fading sunlight doing little to warm the sudden chill in my bones, it was as if 1,000 tiny, forgotten slights, small moments of feeling overlooked or underestimated over the past 7 years, suddenly coalesced into one undeniable, crystal-clear truth. It wasn't just Amanda's joke. It was the culmination of every time I'd felt invisible, every instance where my contributions seemed to dissipate into the ether, every moment I'd been the punchline, the afterthought, the one who wasn't quite there. The hum of the party, the clinking of glasses, the distant shouts of children playing tag, all of it faded into a dull roar, a muted backdrop to the sharp, incandescent clarity that now burned in my mind. A strange calm washed over me, a quiet resolve that settled in with the weight of an ancient, undeniable truth. My hand, almost unconsciously, reached for the hot dog resting on my paper plate, its bun slightly soggy from the lingering barbecue sauce, and I slowly, deliberately, raised it. It wasn't an act of defiance, not exactly, but more like a ceremonial gesture, a silent acknowledgement of the shift occurring within me. My gaze, steady and unwavering, found Amanda's across the picnic table. She was still smiling, a trace of lingering amusement in her eyes, oblivious to the seismic shift her careless words had triggered. The air between us seemed to crackle with an unspoken tension, a silent challenge laid bare, even if only I was aware of it. And then, the words, quiet yet imbued with a newfound gravitas, slipped from my lips, unbidden but entirely resolute. Challenge accepted. It wasn't loud, not a shout, but it held a quiet power, a resonance that seemed to vibrate through the very fabric of the evening. The faint aroma of smoke and grilling meat filled my nostrils, no longer a pleasant scent but a sharp, almost metallic tang, a memory of the moment my world had subtly, irrevocably, changed. The words hung in the air, a declaration that only I truly understood, a silent promise whispered to myself in the face of their laughter. There was no theatricality to it, no grand gesture beyond the simple raising of a hot dog, but within me, it felt like a dam had broken, releasing a torrent of pent-up feelings, hardening them into something sharp and unyielding. The easygoing atmosphere of the barbecue, the warm glow of the fairy lights, the comfortable chatter, all of it now seemed to possess an underlying current of something more profound, something that had been stirred awake by a throwaway joke. I held Amanda's gaze for a beat longer, a silent acknowledgement passing between us, though I knew she only saw my calm exterior, not the fire that had just ignited within. This wasn't about vengeance, not in a petty sense, but about reclaiming something, about proving a point not to them, but to myself. The hot dog in my hand felt suddenly heavy, a tangible symbol of this newfound determination. The sounds of the party slowly seeped back into my awareness, but they were different now, filtered through the lens of this quiet, internal declaration. The laughter no longer stung, it merely echoed, a distant, almost hollow sound. The ease of the evening was gone, replaced by a subtle undercurrent of purpose, a silent hum of resolve that now guided every breath I took, every thought that passed through my mind. The challenge had been issued, inadvertently, carelessly, and I, just as inadvertently, had accepted it. The world outside continued its barbecue revelry, oblivious to the quiet revolution that had just taken place inside me. Under the soft glow of twilight and the lingering scent of charcoal, the last echoes of the barbecue faded, replaced by the hushed hum of the air conditioning unit and the gentle creak of the old house settling for the night. Gregory, oblivious to the silent revolution that had ignited within me just hours earlier, was already deeply asleep beside me, his breathing a soft, rhythmic comfort that, for the first time, felt strangely alien. The easy intimacy of his presence was now tinged with a subtle, almost imperceptible distance, a chasm that had opened in the space between us, filled with the echo of shared laughter at my supposed insignificance. I lay awake for hours, the incandescent clarity from earlier burning away the exhaustion, my mind a whirlwind of possibilities and plans. The quiet hum of the night was the only witness to the meticulous unfolding of my resolve. Then, at precisely 2 a.m., as if an internal alarm had chimed, I rose silently from the bed, careful not to disturb Gregory, the cool floorboards a welcome shock against my bare feet. The house was bathed in the pale, silver glow of the moon filtering through the windows, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to mirror the furtive movements of my thoughts. This wasn't a panicked flight, It was a methodical, almost surgical operation, driven by a quiet, unwavering determination. My laptop, a familiar tool for work, transformed into a covert instrument of liberation. I started with the most practical matters, the cold, hard facts that would underpin any escape, my bank accounts. I meticulously reviewed balances, calculated potential withdrawals, and assessed the liquid assets I could access quickly, every digit a step closer to autonomy. Then, my focus shifted to housing, specifically the possibility of a fresh start. My sister, Olivia, lived in Seattle, a city that felt a world away from the familiar, almost suffocating comfort of my current life. I opened a new browser tab, typing in search queries for apartments, scanning listings, assessing rent prices, and mentally mapping out potential neighborhoods. Each virtual tour, each blurry photo of a living room, felt like a breath of fresh air, a glimpse into a future where my existence wouldn't be a punchline. The logistics of transportation were next. Flights, trains, rental cars. I explored every avenue, comparing routes, costs, and travel times, weighing efficiency against discretion. The process was almost meditative, each click of the mouse, each keystroke, a deliberate, quiet act of rebellion. The silence of the night was punctuated only by the soft whir of the laptop fan and the occasional distant chirp of a cricket, a stark contrast to the tumultuous churning of my thoughts. I moved through the tasks with a focused intensity, my mind sharper than it had been in years, every detail falling into place with an almost uncanny ease. The initial sting of Amanda's joke had transformed into a potent fuel, propelling me forward with a quiet, unwavering resolve. As the first hint of dawn began to paint the sky in hues of pale pink and orange, casting a soft, ethereal light through the bedroom window, I closed my laptop. The screen flickered off, plunging the room back into a softer dimness, but the darkness within me had been replaced by a nascent light. The meticulous investigation was complete. Every detail, every contingency, had been considered. I had a plan. It wasn't just a vague idea or a desperate wish. It was a concrete, actionable blueprint for my future, a silent declaration of independence born out of the ashes of a barbecue joke. I slipped back into bed, the mattress sighing softly under my weight, and lay there, eyes wide open, watching the room slowly brighten. Gregory stirred beside me, a soft murmur escaping his lips, utterly unaware of the quiet, decisive shift that had occurred while he slept. The air felt different, charged with a subtle anticipation, a quiet hum of purpose that now vibrated through every fiber of my being. The world outside was waking up, but I had already been awake, charting a new course, silently, methodically, under the cover of darkness. The sun rose, casting long shadows that stretched across the floor, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was stepping into the light. The pre-dawn light was still a muted gray, the world outside hushed and seemingly holding its breath, as I moved through the house with a quiet purpose that belied the monumental shift occurring within me. My carefully constructed plan, forged in the silent hours of the night, now guided my every move. I didn't pack much, just the bare essentials, a small duffel bag containing a few changes of clothes, important documents, my laptop, and anything truly irreplaceable. Each item chosen with a brutal efficiency, stripping away the superfluous, focusing only on what was absolutely necessary for the journey ahead. There was no room for sentimentality, no time for lingering over mementos. This was an act of surgical extraction, a clean break. The next step was the most difficult, a necessary severing of ties that felt both liberating and strangely heavy, dividing our joint funds. I transferred half of our shared savings into Gregory's account, a fair and equitable split, leaving no room for accusations of theft or abandonment. This wasn't about malice. It was about self-preservation, about reclaiming a part of myself that had been slowly eroding. The digital transfer was quick, almost antiseptic, a few clicks of a mouse marking the irreversible division of a shared future. Then came the letter. I drafted it mentally a dozen times throughout the night, refining each phrase, trying to convey a truth that was both deeply personal and universally understood without descending into accusation or blame. It was short, concise, and to the point. I needed time. Time to figure things out, time to breathe, time to find myself again. It wasn't a goodbye forever, not explicitly, but an indefinite pause, an acknowledgement that something fundamental had shifted. I left it on his nightstand, a stark white rectangle against the dark wood, knowing it would be the first thing he saw when he woke. The hardest part, the final symbolic act of detachment, was the wedding ring. It felt heavy on my finger, a cold band of metal that suddenly represented not a promise, but a tether. With a deep breath, I slid it off, the familiar weight suddenly absent, leaving a faint, pale indentation on my skin, a ghost of what once was. I placed it gently beside the letter, a silent testament to a chapter closing. The house, once a sanctuary, now felt like a stage from which I was making my quiet exit. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of the wind outside, seemed amplified, a soundtrack to my clandestine departure. I grabbed my duffel bag, slung it over my shoulder, and walked towards the front door. The air outside was cool and crisp, carrying the faint scent of dew on grass, a refreshing contrast to the stifling atmosphere I felt I was leaving behind. I didn't hesitate. I didn't look back. There was no dramatic pause, no wistful glance over my shoulder at the life I was leaving behind. To look back would be to falter, to allow doubt to creep in, to undermine the resolve that had taken root so firmly within me. My gaze was fixed forward, on the pre-dawn street, on the quiet promise of the unknown. Each step away from the house felt lighter, a release, a quiet affirmation of the challenge I had so silently accepted. The front door clicked shut behind me, a soft, definitive sound that marked the end of one chapter and the hesitant, yet determined, beginning of another. The world was still mostly asleep, oblivious to the quiet disappearance of one person, a person who had decided, without fanfare or apology, to finally be noticed, even if it meant vanishing first. Seattle greeted me not with sunshine, but with a soft, persistent rain, a gentle patter against the airplane window that felt less like a damp welcome and more like a cleansing, a quiet washing away of the past. It was exactly what I needed, a muted, gray palette against which to begin painting my new life. The air, cool and fresh, filled my lungs with a sense of calm I hadn't realized I was missing, a stark contrast to the stifling air of unspoken expectations I had left behind. My sister, Olivia, was a beacon in the bustling airport, her familiar smile a warm anchor in the sea of new faces. There was no need for lengthy explanations, no probing questions about my sudden arrival. A single glance, a shared understanding, passed between us, a silent acknowledgement of the unspoken pain and the quiet resolve that had brought me to her doorstep. She simply enveloped me in a tight, comforting hug, and in that embrace, a different kind of burden lifted. Olivia, with her characteristic efficiency and unwavering support, quickly helped me navigate the initial hurdles of starting over. Within days, I found a small apartment in a quieter neighborhood, a cozy, unassuming space with large windows that looked out onto rain-slicked streets and the perpetually misty outlines of distant trees. It wasn't grand, but it was mine, a blank canvas waiting to be filled with new stories, new routines, new possibilities. The scent of fresh paint and possibility hung in the air, a subtle promise of autonomy. The practicalities followed swiftly, opening a new bank account, a crisp, clean slate for my finances, untainted by shared histories or lingering ghosts. Then, a new phone, a symbolic severing of digital ties, a fresh number, a quiet declaration that my accessibility was now on my terms. Each step, no matter how small, felt like an act of deliberate creation, a rebuilding from the ground up, brick by carefully chosen brick. The most significant shift, however, came in my work. My freelance career, once a means to an end, now became a vessel for self-expression, a tangible manifestation of my newfound freedom. I began to actively seek out projects that reflected my true style, the kind of work that ignited a spark within me, rather than simply paying the bills. It was a slow process, a gradual rediscovery of my own voice, but each commission, each client who genuinely appreciated my creative vision, felt like a small victory, a validation that went beyond monetary gain. The hours I poured into these projects no longer felt like a grind but a passionate pursuit, a reclamation of a part of myself that had been stifled, overlooked, and taken for granted for far too long. The rain outside my window continued its steady rhythm, a soothing lullaby accompanying my quiet transformation, and as I sat at my makeshift desk, the glow of my laptop illuminating my face, I realized that Seattle, with its perpetual gray skies and the unwavering support of my sister, wasn't just a place to escape to. It was a place where I could finally, truly, begin to exist. The gentle, persistent Seattle rain became a comforting backdrop to my slow, deliberate process of healing and growth. It wasn't an overnight transformation, but a gradual unfolding, nurtured by the quiet solitude of my new apartment and the unwavering support of Olivia. The immediate relief of escape eventually gave way to a deeper, more profound need to understand the echoes of the past, the subtle ways years of feeling unseen had shaped me. That's where therapy came in. My therapist, a kind woman with an uncanny ability to distill complex emotions into simple, actionable insights, helped me systematically unpack those years of humiliation, layer by painful layer. We traced the threads back to their origins, not just to Amanda's careless joke, but to earlier, smaller moments that had accumulated, subtly eroding my sense of self-worth. Each session was like clearing away mental clutter, making space for something new to grow, something stronger and more resilient. It was hard, often uncomfortable work, but with each realization, each quiet acknowledgement of past wounds, I felt a little lighter, a little more whole. Parallel to this internal work, my professional life began to blossom in ways I hadn't dared to imagine. The decision to pursue projects that genuinely resonated with my creative spirit had opened doors I didn't even know existed. I stumbled upon a mentor, an older, immensely talented designer who saw something in my nascent work that I hadn't yet recognized in myself. She didn't just offer advice. She challenged me, pushing me beyond my comfort zone, encouraging me to regain my creative courage, to trust my instincts, and to embrace the unique vision I had always stifled. Her belief in me was a powerful catalyst, urging me to experiment, to take risks, and to truly own my style. With her guidance, my professional opportunities grew exponentially. Larger, more exciting projects landed in my inbox, and the steady stream of freelance work transformed into a robust, fulfilling career that felt less like a job and more like a true calling. The financial independence that followed was more than just a practical necessity. It was a tangible symbol of my autonomy, a concrete manifestation of the life I was building on my own terms. Then, 6 months after I had left, a crisp, official-looking envelope arrived in the mail. The Seattle rain was coming down in sheets that day, blurring the city outside my window into a watercolor painting. Inside the envelope were the final divorce papers. It wasn't a shock. Gregory and I had communicated briefly and formally through lawyers, a distant, almost abstract process that felt entirely separate from the life I was now living. Yet, holding those papers, seeing the legal dissolution of a chapter one had once believed would last a lifetime, brought a strange mix of emotions. There was a pang of something akin to sadness, a quiet acknowledgement of what had been, but it was quickly overshadowed by a profound sense of closure, a feeling of lightness and liberation. It wasn't an ending, but a definitive, undeniable new beginning. I signed the papers, the pen feeling steady and firm in my hand, and placed them back in the envelope. The rain outside continued, a steady, rhythmic cadence that matched the quiet, confident beat of my own heart. The humiliation had faded, replaced by strength. The fear had given way to courage, and the silence had been filled, not with emptiness, but with the vibrant hum of a life truly lived, finally, fully, on my own terms. A year had passed since I'd slipped away into the quiet anonymity of Seattle, a year filled with the steady rhythm of rain, the gentle hum of personal growth, and the invigorating challenge of a blossoming career. My small apartment, once a sparse sanctuary, now felt like a true home, filled with the warmth of my own choosing. My creative work was thriving, each project a testament to the courage I'd painstakingly rebuilt, and the echoes of past humiliations had faded to a distant murmur, almost entirely drowned out by the vibrant symphony of my new life. Then, one crisp autumn morning, an email landed in my inbox, a seemingly innocuous invitation that would subtly, yet undeniably, pull me back into a world I thought I had definitively left behind. It was an invitation to meet with a company, Greenleaf Organics, a burgeoning brand seeking innovative packaging designs for their new line of sustainably sourced products. The brief was exciting, perfectly aligned with the kind of meaningful, impactful work I now sought, and my portfolio, bolstered by a year of dedicated effort and growing recognition, was more than ready for such an opportunity. I felt a surge of professional excitement, a quiet thrill at the prospect of a new, engaging challenge. I responded with a confident acceptance, eager to learn more about Greenleaf Organics and their vision. It wasn't until a few days later, while doing some preliminary research on the company, that I discovered the unexpected, almost cosmic twist. Buried within their corporate information, a small but significant detail emerged. Greenleaf Organics was a subsidiary of Caldwell Marketing Group. The name hit me with the force of a soft, unexpected wave, not a crashing tsunami, but a gentle, undeniable pull backward. Caldwell Marketing Group. That was Gregory's father's company, the monolithic firm that had loomed large, almost imperceptibly, in the background of Gregory's life and, by extension, mine. The realization brought with it a complex swirl of emotions. Not fear, not regret, but a peculiar blend of surprise, a faint whisper of irony, and a quiet sense of readiness. The universe, it seemed, had a subtle way of weaving disparate threads back together, of presenting unexpected opportunities to confront, or perhaps simply acknowledge, the paths once taken. There was no hesitation, no sudden urge to rescind my acceptance. The woman I was now, the one who had meticulously rebuilt her life from the ground up, was not the same woman who had silently endured a casual joke about her disappearance. I had nothing to fear, nothing to hide. My work spoke for itself, my confidence was earned, and the person on the other side of that meeting was simply a potential client, regardless of their family ties. The thought of stepping, even indirectly, back into their orbit no longer felt like a threat, but an affirmation. It was a chance to stand on my own 2 feet, on my own merit, in a space that had once felt intimidatingly out of reach. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on me. The very world I had vanished from was now inadvertently seeking me out, drawn by the very strength and talent I had cultivated in my absence. I reread the invitation, the words Greenleaf Organics, taking on a new, more profound meaning. And with a quiet sense of anticipation, devoid of any lingering bitterness or fear, I confirmed my availability. The meeting was set. The circle, it seemed, was preparing to close, or perhaps simply to expand. The air in the grand ballroom hummed with the sophisticated murmur of networking, the clinking of champagne glasses, and the subtle scent of expensive perfume and ambition. This wasn't just any industry event. It was the annual Marketing Innovation Gala, a glittering affair where the very best of the marketing world gathered to celebrate breakthroughs and forge new connections. And here I was, not as an insecure tag-along, but as a recognized professional, invited to present my work for Greenleaf Organics, a project that was already generating industry buzz. The sense of anticipation that had simmered since I accepted the invitation now crystallized into a quiet confidence, a serene certainty that felt miles away from the nervous apprehension that would have once consumed me. As I moved through the elegant crowd, my portfolio tucked securely under my arm, my gaze swept across the room and landed on a familiar tableau, the Caldwell family. There they were, gathered in a small cluster near the bar, looking exactly as I remembered them, a picture of familial cohesion and quiet power. Mr. Caldwell, Gregory's father, stood tall and commanding, his silver hair catching the light. Mrs. Caldwell, refined and poised, smiled serenely at someone's joke. And then, of course, there was Gregory, looking just as I remembered him, perhaps a little older around the eyes, but otherwise unchanged. For a fleeting moment, a ghost of the past flickered, a memory of countless family gatherings where I had felt like an outsider, a polite accessory to Gregory's life. But that feeling vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by the solid ground of my present reality. I wasn't there as his partner, or even as their acquaintance. I was there as myself, a respected peer in this competitive landscape. The introductions were inevitable, facilitated by a mutual contact who enthusiastically lauded my contributions to the Greenleaf Organics project. Mr. Caldwell's smile was polite, professional, then broadened into something resembling genuine interest as he realized who I was. There was a flicker of surprise in his eyes, perhaps a hint of recognition, but it was quickly masked by the polished veneer of a seasoned executive. Mrs. Caldwell was equally gracious, her initial pleasantries giving way to a more direct, almost curious assessment. But it was Gregory who held my gaze. His eyes, at first wide with shock, softened into an expression of profound, almost vulnerable, recognition. The easy smile he'd worn moments before faltered, replaced by a complex mix of surprise, regret, and something deeper, something I hadn't seen in him for a very long time. We talked, briefly at first, about the Greenleaf project, my answers confident and articulate, flowing easily from months of dedicated work. I presented my designs, my voice steady and clear, explaining the thought process, the creative decisions, the strategic intent behind every element. This wasn't just a portfolio review. It was a quiet declaration of my competence, my newfound voice. Their reactions were genuinely impressed, their questions insightful, and their compliments sincere. As the conversation broadened, the professional facade between Gregory and me began to crack, just slightly. He listened intently, his eyes tracing the contours of my face, searching for something, perhaps, that he hadn't realized was missing until now. And then, amidst the ambient hum of the gala, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said it, the words laced with a raw, undeniable sincerity. I missed you. It wasn't an apology, not explicitly, but an admission, a quiet acknowledgement of the space I had left behind. The words hung in the air between us, a fragile bridge connecting past and present. I simply met his gaze, a quiet understanding passing between us, a silent testament to how far I had come and how profoundly everything had changed. The noise of the gala, the laughter and conversation, faded into a distant hum, leaving only the quiet echo of his words and the steady, confident beat of my own heart. The Marketing Innovation Gala was more than just a professional triumph. It was a quiet catalyst, gently nudging the door open to conversations I hadn't known I needed to have. Following the initial surprise of our reunion, Gregory and I found ourselves in a series of recent conversations, not hurried or forced, but measured and reflective, spread out over several weeks. We met for coffee, then later for a quiet dinner, the awkwardness of our first encounter giving way to a tentative rediscovery of a connection that had once been so central to my life. He was different, subtly so. His gaze was more direct, less guarded, and there was a newfound vulnerability in his demeanor. It was during one of these conversations, over a quiet meal at a small, unpretentious restaurant near my Seattle apartment, that he confessed, almost tentatively, that he himself had started going to a therapist. The admission wasn't a plea for sympathy, but a simple statement of fact, a quiet acknowledgement of his own journey since my departure. He spoke about realizing things, about reevaluating dynamics, and about how he now saw his family differently, with a fresh perspective that allowed him to understand some of the underlying complexities he'd previously overlooked. There was a genuine introspection in his voice, a clear effort to understand not just what had happened between us, but also his own role in the broader landscape of his family's influence. He seemed to genuinely grasp that my leaving wasn't just about him, but about a larger narrative, one he was now exploring for himself. Beyond Gregory, the re-entry into their orbit, however indirect, also facilitated separate, unexpected conversations with other members of the Caldwell family. I had a surprisingly candid chat with Patricia, his mother, during a follow-up meeting about the Greenleaf Project. She was, as always, impeccably polite, but there was a new softness to her eyes, a subtle warmth that hadn't been there before. Our discussion, initially focused on business, gently veered into more personal territory. She spoke, not with overt apologies, but with a quiet understanding, hinting at her own reflections on family dynamics and the silent pressures that sometimes shape relationships. It wasn't an explicit acknowledgement of fault, but a palpable shift in tone, a recognition of the complexities of human connection that transcended the surface pleasantries. And then there was Amanda. Our conversation was the most surprising of all. We ran into each other unexpectedly at an industry event a few weeks after the gala. The initial interaction was tentative, a polite exchange about our respective work. But then, she took a deep breath, and with a surprising directness that cut through the polite chatter of the room, she finally admitted that my joke was just a joke. Her voice was softer than I'd ever heard it, almost vulnerable. She even added, with a genuine note of surprise, that she didn't expect me to leave. There was no malice in her tone, no lingering amusement, just a quiet, almost bewildered acknowledgement of the unintended consequences of her careless words. It wasn't a grand apology, but it was an honest admission, a small, yet significant crack in the facade of her usual sharp wit. In that moment, surrounded by the hum of an industry event, a quiet sense of release washed over me. The circle, it seemed, had truly closed, not with a bang, but with a series of quiet, honest conversations that allowed for understanding, if not always full reconciliation. The weight of those past humiliations, once a heavy cloak, had truly lifted, replaced by the clear, open air of genuine connection, even with those I had left behind. The quiet conversations with Gregory, Patricia, and even Amanda, though illuminating, didn't lead to a reconciliation in the way some might expect. The path back to what wasn't the path I needed to take. My decision was clear. I didn't go back to Gregory. The connection we'd briefly re-established was built on a different foundation, one of mutual respect and understanding for our individual journeys, not a romantic rekindling. The space I'd created for myself, the life I'd meticulously built, felt too precious, too authentically mine, to surrender. The freedom I now felt, the profound sense of self-worth that had blossomed from within, was a treasure I wasn't willing to compromise. It wasn't about bitterness or lingering resentment. It was about honoring the person I had become. Instead, I invested deeper in my own burgeoning future. The success of my business, bolstered by the Greenleaf Organics project and my growing reputation, allowed me to make a significant move. I bought myself a house. It wasn't a sprawling mansion or a grand estate, but a charming, modest place with a small garden in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood. It was my house, purchased with my hard-earned money, a tangible symbol of my independence and stability. Every corner of it whispered of autonomy, every decision about its decor a reflection of my own taste, uninfluenced by anyone else's preferences. It felt like planting roots in my own soil, solidifying my place in this new, self-defined world. My professional life continued its upward trajectory. I continued to develop my business, taking on more challenging and fulfilling projects that allowed my creativity to truly soar. The work no longer felt like a means to an end, but an integral part of who I was, a source of profound satisfaction and continuous growth. And then, in a delightful twist of fate, I even became friends with Charlotte, Michael's wife, Gregory's cousin. She, too, had often seemed like an outsider within the Caldwell family, a quiet observer of their intricate dynamics. Our connection blossomed unexpectedly, forged in shared experiences of navigating the unique world of that family, and a mutual understanding of what it felt like to carve out one's own identity within it. We found common ground in our interests, our values, and the quiet joy of simply being ourselves, unburdened by expectations or lineage. Her friendship became another unexpected gift, a testament to the fact that genuine connection could be found in the most surprising places. The greatest irony of it all, the profound truth that settled deep within me, was this. By deliberately disappearing from their world, the one where my value was often measured by my proximity to Gregory or my ability to blend seamlessly into their expectations, I had, paradoxically, become more visible in my own. My absence from their lives hadn't rendered me invisible. It had allowed me to truly see myself, and for others to see me, not as an extension of someone else, but as a whole, vibrant individual. The joke that had stung so deeply, the one about no one noticing if I disappeared, had become the unlikely catalyst for my profound emergence. I was no longer a shadow in someone else's light. I was the architect of my own. And in that, I found a peace and fulfillment more profound than any fleeting acceptance could have offered.